In this video, I'm going to take a look at making a very high contrast black and white image from a regular RAW file. I'm going to do this in Lightroom, but the process is very similar if you to use Adobe Camera Raw. So to start off with, I'm in the Develop module on Lightroom, and at the top of the basic control panel, I'm going to click black and white, and that takes the colour out. I'm going to drop the exposure down a bit just to get some deeper blacks, so I'm going to go to about 1.5 stops under exposure. I'm going to turn the contrast up, so the contrast I'm going to raise right up to +100, and the same with the whites, so put the whites right up to 100. Then I'm going to turn down the blacks a bit as well, make sure I get some good solid blacks. I'm going to go down to about -40, something like that on the blacks, and play around. I mean, with this technique there are no set rules, you just have a go with the sliders and see what you like. I'm going to have a go with the shadows here. I think just raising that slightly gives a bit more and obviously in the mid-tones. Maybe just need to counteract that with a bit more black. And then I think I'm going to finish off with some texture, which is like a fine contrast control in the presence slider. So I'm going to go up to about maybe 70, something like 70. And I think that is quite an interesting, very stark graphic effect on this particular image. With this one, I could finish off by making sure it is standing perfectly upright. It's fairly straight, but as you can see just here on the right hand side, there is a slight bit of vertical misalignment. So if I go to transform on the develop panel and vertical, I think if I go to the negative slightly, it just makes the whole thing stand up a little bit better, and I think that's just about right if you measure it against the grid. Okay, so I'm going to click Constrain Crop there to get rid of the little excess bits. And that's that image finished, I think. I'm going to go to a second one that I have. And this is just kind of, I'm going to call this a found still life, if you like. It was just a discarded beer can, which had been dropped among the reeds. So I'm going to do a similar thing with this one. I'm going to go to the Basics panel. I'm going to click black and white, and I'm going to really drop the exposure on this one quite a lot, so I think down to about -3.5. Then put the, obviously it looks too dark at the moment, but if we put the contrast up now, it's even blacker. Hold your horses. Going to put the highlights up. And I'm also going to put the shadows up. And also the whites right up to the top. And drop the blacks down a bit. And add some texture. Just have a little tweak with these controls. Now you see, if you go any more than that, you get any more exposure than that, and you get too much white in your image. So you can drop that down a bit more. Let's try tweaking the contrast. I quite like that up at the top. Try tweaking the highlights. Strange with this technique, the highlights seem to work the opposite way that you would expect. And also the shadows seem to work quite backwards too. What you do probably want to do with this is leave the histogram control highlight alerts switched off, because we are obviously clipping the image quite a lot, but I think this technique really relies on the extreme whites and blacks, so if you leave those switched off, you don't get the colours distracting you. Okay, I'm going to move on to a third image, and this is probably the most delicate one of the three, which is just a feather. I don't know if it's a swan feather or a goose feather or something like that, but it was just left on the side of the river in the grass. So same as the other two, I'm going to switch it to black and white, and I'm going to turn the exposure right down to about 3.5 negative. I'm going to put the highlights up to about plus 70-ish, and I'm going to drop the shadows down a little bit, and I'm going to increase the whites, which is the main kicker on this one, and that just brings the whole thing to life. Now you can do this by eye. You see, as I take it right up to the top of the plus 100 on the whites, you lose detail, but then if you just drop it back down again, you see all that beautiful sort of mid-high tone just come back, and you can see all the veins in the feather and the droplets of water. I think that's a really nice effect. It's a really delicate image, I think, on this. Then you can drop the blacks a little bit just to make sure that you've taken some of the distractions away. I mean, you could go around individually with the adjustment brush and do areas in here if you thought there were distractions on these tips of the grasses. That's kind of a matter of taste. There's also a little bit here which I find slightly distracting, a piece of twig or grass that's coming over the edge of the feather that you could also get rid of, either with the spot removal tool, or you could take it into Photoshop and use the clone tool. I don't know if we need texture on this one. I think it's okay. That adds just, yeah, it's quite nice. Just adds a little bit of extra. Yeah, I quite like that. Okay, I think that one's finished too. So basically, to recap, most of them generally need to drop the exposure a bit just to accentuate the shadows and highlights. You need to play with mostly, I would say, the whites and the blacks in your image. Contrast in most of them too, and texture is quite a good thing to work with. The shadows and the highlights controls, when you've done this extreme processing, seem to work a bit counterintuitively, but play with those too. And really just turn the sliders up or down much more than you would normally think was necessary in a normal image. But to get this extreme high contrast look, you just have to really go for it and turn the sliders up and down much more than you would perhaps normally do. And just tune it to your eye, really. It's quite an effective look, I think. I think probably this one is my favourite image, the really delicate details on the feather. The beer can is perhaps a bit more graphic and a bit more extreme, and that could be just the nature of the image, I suppose. And then the landscape, the snowy landscape, is again very graphic, very high contrast, very little mid-tone in there, just a little bit in this concrete on the wall. So have a go at that, have a go with the sliders, choose an image which is already looking interesting and perhaps looking reasonably contrasty, something where the contrast is good between the dark and the highlights, or where you've got something like the feather, which is a lighter object on a darker background. That would make for a good conversion, I think. Good luck.